for the first time in decades, I have total freedom over my time, which is amazing.
When did the idea of FIRE become a thing for you? Like financial independence, retire early? When did you realize you were on track for that? Okay, everyone, welcome to Financial Clarity for Doctors. Rochelle Vanderzanden here with Corey Janoff, as always.
Hello.
Hello. And then we are also joined today by Leif Dahleen, aka the physician on FIRE. You want to say hi, Leif?
Hi, Leif. Hi, Corey. Hi, Rochelle.
Perfect.
Good to be with you.
We are recording from quarantine today, but we wanted to talk to Leif today a little bit about his philosophy. He is the creator of the popular blog on personal finances for doctors, the Physician on FIRE. He retired from medicine at age 43, and now he spends quite a bit of his time on the blog, but also spending time traveling with his wife and 2 kids, which is really exciting and a little bit grounded at the moment, but should be able to pick back up in a bit. Before we go too far into a whole bunch of questions, do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself so that our listeners who don't know you very well can learn a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. And like you said, I'm an anesthesiologist. Haven't worked since last August. That was 2019 was my last shift. I wasn't planning on working at all this year, although I did tell my old employer and old department chief that I'd be willing to go back if the need arises there. I still have a Minnesota license and credentials at the hospital. So that still remains a possibility. But the idea was I figured out I kind of had enough money to retire and decided that there were a lot of really cool things we could do as a family if I went down that path. So, for the last 7 months or so, we were traveling. Spent a couple months in Mexico, a couple months in Spain. Very disheartening to see what's happening there right now, and now what's happening in our own backyards here in the States. But in a nutshell, that's it. I've got 2 boys, 9 and 11 years old, and a wife. And for the first time in decades, I have total freedom over my time, which is amazing.
I bet. And you mentioned you'd be willing to go back. Do you plan on maintaining your licenses and working in some capacity someday, or is this kind of just more of a favor while things are crazy right now?
Yeah, I look at it more as the latter. Like I'm willing. I still have the skills to, intubate people that need to be intubated, and maybe minimal critical care skills. It's been quite a while, but anesthesia has some overlap there. So, but I did work part-time for the last 2 years before I retired. So that was kind of a trial run to see how it would be going weeks at a time without actually showing up to the hospital. And that went pretty well. So my tentative plan was to keep my credentials and license and do the CME, for a year or 2. And we're not even 1 year in yet. So that's where I'm at right now.
Great. And then when did you become interested in personal finances?
Well, when I first had personal money to do something with, finished residency in 2006, and my income went from 38 or 40,000 a year to almost 10 times that, overnight. And so that's when I really had to kind of figure out, all right, where is this money going to go? What am I going to do with it? I had spent a little time even in medical school kind of preparing, and I know my father recommended, and I think even sent me the book called The Only Investment Guide You'll Ever Need from Andrew Tobias. And it wasn't necessarily the only one, but it was a great intro. And so I had that as a little bit of a head start on my financial education way back as, I believe, a third-year medical student.
Awesome. I feel like a lot of times people in medical school and residency, they don't know a whole lot. So it's good when people take the incentive to teach themselves a little bit.
Yeah, or in their 10th or 20th year of practicing, they don't know a whole lot. So trying to change that, one blog post, podcast at a time.
When did the idea of FIRE become a thing for you? Like financial independence, retire early? When did you realize you were on track for that?
Yeah, that's a cool acronym, and it's part of my name, Physician on FIRE.
Yeah.
I didn't know really about this concept. I mean, I thought maybe I would retire early-ish in my 50s, maybe do some travel work, locum tenens work for a while, once the kids were out of the house, that kind of thing. That was in the back of my mind. But then about five plus years ago now, I discovered this blog called Mr. Money Mustache, a guy out in Colorado who had retired from his software engineering job at age 30 to start a family. And I read a lot about what he had to say and figured out what the formula was, and realized that at age 39 myself, I pretty much had financial independence right then. And then so that's when I had to start thinking about, well, what am I going to do with this FI? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, do I want to continue working? You can make more choices at that point.
Right. So it was about a 5-year plan that my wife and I came up with at the time. We had just moved to a new community to us and started a job about a year prior to that. And it was the best job I ever had. And so I was in no hurry to change anything. But the more we thought about what we could do without a job, the more we liked that idea. And we made that a reality, like I said, last summer.
Fantastic. When did you decide and why to start your blog?
Well, yeah, I was reading that Mr. Money Mustache. I thought that was really insightful, and I really enjoyed the way he wrote. That led me to maybe a few other FIRE blogs and a doctor blog or two on personal finance. And the White Coat Investor was the main one that I discovered, and he's still definitely the top dog in this space. But I didn't find a blog that I was looking for, which was more of like a high income financial independence, one less focused on frugality, and just figured, well, if it's not out there, maybe I can create it. So I just took a stab at it and started writing on a blog that I started up in early 2016.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan, and I don't know if, I'm sure some of the listeners have heard of you and read your stuff, but in terms of your writing style, sense of humor, I feel like we're on the same wavelength there. So I enjoy the posts, especially the ones where you joke around a little bit. Your guest posts with the reference to Spinal Tap, which is always good.
Yeah, I have a little fun with it. I appreciate that, Corey. Thank you.
Yes.
How do you think? Yeah. I was just going to ask, how do you think financial literacy right now among physicians compares to what it was like when you were just getting started?
I think it's slowly getting better. There are definitely more resources out there for people to learn. Like you were saying, Corey, you can kind of identify with the way I write, and then kind of try to be the ordinary average guy, small town guy. But there's someone for everyone. There are dozens of physician personal finance bloggers and podcasters now. When I started, just not even 5 years ago, there were maybe a half dozen that were blogging, and I don't think any podcasts at the time from physicians on the topic of personal finance. So there are a lot more resources, and I think with burnout being such a big issue and the lack of autonomy as more and more physicians are employed and told what to do and how to practice, people are realizing that it's important to be a good steward of your money and give yourself options, like you mentioned earlier, Rochelle, which is what financial independence does. So I think the combination of having more people to learn from and good reasons to get control of your finances has improved financial literacy. I think we still have a long way to go, though.
Yeah, I'm sure, some people are all about it. Other people, it's more of like pulling teeth, but definitely feel like the resources and information is out there for those who want it.
Yeah, it's just about inertia, well, yeah, I need to look at that someday, but someday isn't going to come around unless you really decide, okay, today I'm going to do one thing and figure something out, figure out where my money is, figure out what it's invested in, and go from there.
You mentioned burnout. I don't know how much that played a role in your decision to retire completely from medicine as opposed to work in a more limited capacity on your own terms. I guess the last couple of years you kind of did that, but how did you make that decision?
Yeah, I think if I had any symptoms of burnout, they were fairly mild. I think a lot of just the aspects of being an anesthesiologist there's some overlap with the symptoms of burnout, like a lack of autonomy. You kind of are told what to do and where to be and when to be there, and people want you in 2 or 3 places at once. It can be busy, but I think it was a good job for me, and I don't regret having done it. But at the same time, I always enjoyed my days off more than my work days. And so burnout wasn't a huge factor, but yeah.
I think we were talking about this a little bit before recording, but do you mind telling our listeners also, like, do you plan to maintain your medical license, continue practicing in some capacity, retiring completely?
Unless I go back during this COVID-19 pandemic to aid in that, that effort, I don't see myself practicing beyond that. And if you would have asked me 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I would have said, yeah, pretty sure I'm done. Life is good now. Yeah.
There we
So
go.
for me, leaving was not so much about like I need to get out of medicine, but just realizing that, I saved well. The stock market was kind to us, and I have different options now, and that doesn't have to include a paid job. And so, yeah, so we took advantage of that.
You've written in some of your blog posts about the concept of geographic arbitrage and how that has helped you achieve financial independence and retire early. Can you talk about that a little bit and what that is?
Yeah, so the concept of geographic arbitrage, and it's somewhat unique to healthcare, but you're taking advantage of living in a lower cost of living area that might actually have higher pay than some of the higher cost of living areas where more people might want to live. Now, for me, I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. My wife is from a small town in Michigan. The upper Midwest is where we wanted to be, and that's where I've done most of my professional work. So I didn't go out of my way to find a low cost of living area or even to look for a really high paying job. But we just worked where places we were familiar with, where we had friends and family. But it's worked out quite well. If you work in law or finance, you typically need to be in a higher cost of living city. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, wherever. A lot of places where the big money is also where it costs a lot to live. And that's almost the opposite, at least on average, in medicine. Higher pay tends to come in the more rural areas in small and medium-sized cities.
Absolutely. I feel like I have that conversation a lot with my clients. How, this is the exact opposite of the way that it is for most people. Like if you go live somewhere where the cost of living is lower, you make less money. But yeah, it's just not the case for doctors most of the time. Yeah.
Right. And now there may be a reason that New York City or San Francisco, not to pick on those two places, but maybe that's where all your family is. That's where you went to school. That's where you met your wife or husband. Yeah, you can make it work. And I know people in those areas that make a lot more than I ever did. But on average, if you look at like a heat map of salary versus location, the center of the U.S., the Midwest, those places tend to offer higher pay.
And some of the other benefits to attract people are great. I'll often have conversations with folks graduating residency with a bunch of student loans, and you got an option potentially, hey, go work in the middle of nowhere and you'll make double what you'd make in San Francisco or New York, plus they'll give you an extra 50 or 100 grand a year to go towards your student loans. Do that for a few years, get out of your hole, and then go back to wherever you ultimately want to be.
Yeah, the first, few years, 5 years of your career, you can really make a lot of progress, knock out just about any student loan balance if you make a choice like that.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about your wife, and I know that she's like written guest blogs a little bit on your blog. And I know that she seems like kind of an integral part of what you're doing in your own life. Can you talk to us a little bit about like how she has helped you achieve your goals and your family's goals?
Yeah, lots of ways. We have been a one income household for the most part, which was my income, but that wouldn't have been possible if she wasn't available 24/7 to our kids and to get them to where they need to be and take care of them and everything else so that I could be available to the hospital 24 hours on call, which I was quite a lot. And then of course it's how much how much you save. There's two factors: how much you earn, how much you spend. And we both, like I said, grew up in small towns. We don't have expensive tastes, and so being, I think, in harmony, being on the same page there when it comes to relative frugality, without even having to discuss a lot of things. We've never argued over spending, because I think we have similar values there. So she's been a big part of it, and and I would have much less to look forward to in retirement if we weren't doing this together.
Mm-hmm.
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
it's really helpful. Yeah, it's really helpful when everyone has the same goals, because that's not always possible with couples and families. But if you're lucky enough to have that, you can definitely achieve them faster.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So tease the listeners a little bit with what your life has been like since you officially retired from medicine.
Yeah, so we moved to northern Michigan, where my wife's family is, and then we took off on our first multi-month travel adventure. We spent 9 weeks in Mexico, and went to we'd actually spent 3 weeks in a city called Guanajuato a couple 3 years ago, and we loved it there. So we went back to Guanajuato, took some Spanish classes, and just kind of sort of lived like the locals to some extent, and explored the area and worked on our language skills. And then we went to Mexico City for a couple weeks, and a city called Querétaro for a couple weeks. Perfect weather, great people, great food, and that was really, really a wonderful family adventure. And our kids really like traveling like that too. We tend to get an Airbnb, stay in a place for 2 to 4 weeks, and kind of get to know the area. As far as our homeschooling or world schooling, the kids, they do some projects related to where we are, learning about the local history, culture, language, etc. So we did that for a couple months, came back home to Michigan and Minnesota to celebrate Christmas with our families, and then did something similar, but in Spain for the months of January and February, coming home just in the very beginning of March, as some of the coronavirus cases were starting to pop up. We had actually spent time in the 3 largest cities in Spain, which was Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia, and we loved it there too.
How are the Spanish skills coming along?
Un poco, and a little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I use the Duolingo app even after we've been back. I've got like a streak going back to last October without officially having missed a day, although they kind of let you miss a day and make up for it. But it's going okay.
Cool. And I know, like you mentioned, homeschooling a little bit and world schooling, which is an exciting idea. Like, how do you manage that while also having fun?
Yeah,
You
my wife
said
would
your
be
kids are 9 and 11?
better person to answer that question, but
Yeah.
she started even in the summers when our kids were in public school. She didn't like the brain drain that happens over that 3-month period, so she would have some enrichment activities for them, get some workbooks for them to be still kind of in school mode, even if for 30 or 45 minutes a day. And so when we were on our own for education, we just kind of expanded upon that. We've done a lot with Khan Academy, which is a free online resource that's got tons of classes for kids from kindergarten all the way through high school and beyond. And some other things that she's found, typing club, and I mentioned Duolingo for language lessons. And so it's a mix of different online resources and some in paper as well. And we found that you can probably get as much education in a couple 3 hours as you would in a normal school day. And a lot of homeschoolers told us that beforehand. I didn't know if I should quite believe it, but yeah, it turns out to be true.
Yeah, not as many distractions and going from one place to another, and yeah.
Right. Yep. And my wife did a little bit of substitute teaching for a year or two when our kids were in school. She was already volunteering at the school, so she said, well, if they need someone to fill in for the whole day, I can do that too. And she realized, yeah, there's a lot of social interaction. There's a lot of different things they do, but as far as what they actually learn in a day, you can cover that pretty quickly at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially at that age. They were, like I said, grade school age at this time.
Absolutely. For some younger doctors who are listening to this who want to achieve FIRE, what are some of the most important things that they can do in your mind to potentially realize that dream?
Yeah, we mentioned the geographic arbitrage that can help, but it's really about just living well below your means, and I challenge physicians to live on half their take-home pay. If you can live on half of what you get after taxes, put the rest towards retiring your debt and making investments, maxing out all your tax-advantaged retirement accounts, and hopefully starting a taxable brokerage account of your own. You live on half, you'll be financially independent in about 15 years, give or take, depending on what the market does. And most physicians, living on half means a 6-figure annual spend, and that's you can live decently well on that, especially in the lower cost of living areas like we talked about.
I know that there's a lot of feelings about debt out there and like getting rid of it immediately and not taking on new debt. Do you have any feelings about debt, or do you think there's a place for debt in a plan?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily on the Dave Ramsey train of like pay off all debt. It's all terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously it makes sense to take on a mortgage for your first home, and most of us took on debts for our student loans, and those are totally appropriate. I don't like taking on debt to buy a car, a boat, an RV, any kind of consumer good. I think if you really want it, you should save up for it, and with a physician's salary, you can. So I've been debt-free since about the time I discovered financial independence, and that was somewhat not that I made any changes. It's just that we were mostly debt-free already. We just had one house that we had to sell from a place where I had lived earlier, and that happened about the same time. So I like being debt-free. I think the psychology of it is good. You obviously have a lot more take-home pay when you're not paying thousands of dollars in mortgage every year, but it takes time to get to that point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Everyone's different in their how they want to live their lifestyle. But for people out there who are wanting to maybe cut some things out of the budget to accelerate their path to financial independence, what are some things you might suggest looking at first?
Well, when you actually look at what people spend money on, it's the big things that matter most. It's the home you choose to live in, whether you're renting or buying. It still costs you a lot of money, and the kind of car you drive, motorcycles, boats, etc. To anything with a motor. And believe it or not, people can really spend a lot of money on food, and that's really usually dining out. Now, right now, not much of an issue, right? We're
Definitely spending more on groceries, though.
Yeah, true. And shop at Aldi, you'll save money there too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we've been ordering out from local restaurants even more than we used to eat out, just to try to keep them afloat, during this difficult time for them. But yeah, the big three, it's where you live, it's what you drive, and how you eat. And then I would also add travel. That can be, we travel a lot, even, throughout my career. My wife and I have traveled a lot. We started traveling as a family a few years before I retired. But we don't take $10,000 vacations. It might be a few $1,000s or even less if we're doing something more locally, camping or something. So, but you can drop a ton of money on travel too when you're allowed to do it.
Yeah,
which is not now.
Yeah, right. A client once, this was probably a couple of years, well, I still have them, but a couple of years ago, we were reviewing expenses, and they estimated they spent about $5,000 a year on travel, and then we actually looked, and it turned out to be closer to $35,000 in the last year.
It's incredible how people have no concept of what they're actually spending. I don't know how you can be off by a factor of 7, but yeah, I don't know. And we've done Disney World, Disney Cruise. We do that stuff sometimes, but you just, you balance that out with like I said, maybe a camping or backpacking trip, or road trip of some kind. Not every trip has to be 4-star, 5-star, convenience. It's not for me, that's for sure.
I do think it's amazing the people that just have no idea how much they're spending on random stuff too. Like we always have a miscellaneous category because things are going to come up and you're going to spend money. And
Mhm.
people are like, oh, I think maybe like a couple $100 a month on miscellaneous stuff. And I'm like, okay, then why don't you have any extra money? Like it's going somewhere. You make more than that. But
Yeah, I never kept track. So when I figured out we were probably financially independent, I didn't know for sure. What I had was my credit card statements. I knew on average what those were. And there wasn't much else we paid out of pocket other than like property taxes and checks for piano lessons or something. But yeah, so I actually kept very close track, mainly because I had a blog and I had to prove it to myself and to my readers that we truly were financially independent. And what I thought we spent was very close to what we actually spent, which at the time, and we had a paid off home, so no housing costs really, but about 70,000 a year. And now it's a bit more because we're paying our own health insurance. But yeah, we're probably in that 80, 90,000, $89,000 a year range. And again, that's without a mortgage or rent payment.
Should be able to live comfortably on that with no
Yeah,
mortgage.
yeah, exactly.
What are some words of wisdom you have for physicians in this current market environment we're in from an investing standpoint?
Yeah, that one where everything dropped like 30% in 3 weeks, 2 weeks. That's, basically what happened to me early in my career, the Great Recession. So I finished residency in 2006, and things started tanking a couple of years later, bottoming out at a 57% drop in the S&P 500 in March of 2009. And what I did worked very well. I stayed the course. I continued investing. I bought on the way down. I bought at the bottom. I bought on the way back up. And when all was said and done, and we recovered from that a couple, 3 years later, I had a lot more money than I would have had I done nothing. And so I would suggest you stay the course, keep making the periodic investments you've been making. And as long as we come back from this to an all-time high, which we have done through every other market disruption in history, then you're going to be better off for it. Yeah, so it's tough. It's tough. I mean, it's hard to see the money you had drop 30% and then, buy more mutual funds, buy more index funds, buy more stocks. But you're buying stuff on sale right now, and it may drop further. Well, then you have even a better deal. Buy more then.
Totally agree. Yeah, I tell people if we don't recover and come back, it probably means we have bigger things to worry about than our money.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. How have the recent market movements kind of impacted your finances? Are you guys still on track to be good?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wrote a blog post sometime last year saying that I had a life goal of losing $1 million. And the idea, and I wrote it all out, was like, yeah, someday I'd like to have, watch our money grow, and then maybe a 10% drop will take $1 million off. Well, I didn't have to wait that long. It happened already. My portfolio balance actually dropped by a full 7-figure sum, which was amazing. I didn't expect it to happen so soon, but I kind of had fun with it. I tweeted it out, hashtag mission accomplished. But no, it doesn't change anything. I knew it would happen at some point. And, as long as you're not selling, you're not locking in any losses. The only selling I've done is quickly replaced. I've done some tax loss harvesting to take advantage of the market drop and lock in some quote unquote paper losses while remaining invested. So that's the main thing I've done differently is watch my balances more closely to take advantage of any of those opportunities in my taxable brokerage account to lower my tax rate.
Yeah, and if anyone that's listening doesn't know what tax loss harvesting is, like ask someone or Google it. It's important.
Yeah, I've got a few posts on my site.
Yeah, there you go.
Show you how to do it with Vanguard and Fidelity, and some tips to not foul things up, which you can do.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I know one of your website's missions is charitable giving. I think you give half of your profits to charity. Any particular ones you're supporting right now?
Well, right now, I actually upped that to 100% for the month of April 2020, which is when we're recording, and that will all go to COVID-19 relief. So we started by giving to the CDC has a fund, the World Health Organization with the UN has a fund, Meals on Wheels has a fund, and that's an important one for elderly who really need to be staying in more than ever, getting food delivered to them. I've also donated to one called Get Us PPE. That's personal protective equipment that our frontline workers need: masks, gloves, gowns, protective face shields, that sort of thing. So yeah, normally, we give to a variety of different charities that help local communities, animal shelters, food shelves, you name it. But right now, we're focused on helping out with the pandemic and the relief
Absolutely.
efforts related to it. Yep. Thanks
I think
for
food
asking.
security. Food security seems like such a big issue right now. I know there's like another one called No Kid Hungry, and it's just like the idea is that there's so many kids that get their meals at school and now they're not in school, which is very
Yeah,
scary for a lot of
it
families.
is. It is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
so to wrap things up, we got a few fun questions for you. What are some of what's your favorite place you've traveled to?
I don't think I can name a favorite, but since it was recent, we loved Valencia, Spain. It's a city of about 1.6 million people or so. There's an old river that was rerouted, and they took that dry riverbed, which already had all kinds of bridges going over it, and turned it into a 5 mile long park full of sports courts and beautiful fountains and running and biking paths. And we were out there all the time. Loved it on the Turia. So I guess I'd go with Valencia as a favorite spot. We'd love to go back there sometime. And but I like exploring new places too. So it won't be anytime soon, even if we had the ability to leave today.
What about some favorite food while you were traveling?
A lot of good food in Mexico.
Hmm.
Enchiladas, street tacos. Yeah, but we went out to eat a lot more than we normally do when we're in Mexico because groceries cost. Well, produce is cheaper, but your average kind of packaged goods are about the same price in Mexico as they are in the States. But your meals at restaurants maybe 1/3 the cost, if not less. So we had a lot of nice meals out in Mexico.
Yeah,
Another kind of geographic arbitrage.
There you go.
Boom. And then I know you're from reading your blog and following you on social media, you're a fan of beer. What's your favorite beer and the best beer you've brewed yourself?
Yeah, you asked me to pick favorites again. I'm a Minnesota guy, and Surly Brewing was kind of the first big, unique craft beer in the state. I mean, there's others, some that's been around forever, but they came out with some really hot forward IPAs, and I love their Surly Abrasive, which is a double IPA that is a seasonal. They used to call it 16 grit, and those names come from the fact that Omar Ansari started his brewery in his father's old abrasives factory. So they made 16 grit sandpaper and other abrasives. So Surly Abrasive is probably one that I would call a favorite and one I look forward to every year.
And then you do some home brewing, right?
I do.
What's in your opinion, the best beer you've brewed yourself?
I do a variety of styles, but I'd say at least half of what I brew is hoppy in some way. And years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I found a Pliny the Elder clone recipe, and that's a beer from Russian River out in California. It's a very popular double IPA as well. And I made that clone, and I thought it tasted darn similar to the original. So I would go with that one, the Pliny the Elder clone. And you can find that recipe easily. You can Google that and find it.
There we go.
Those are hard to make, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, you just got to be sanitary, which is something I'm used to from my day job. So
Yeah, there you go.
yeah.
Pre-children, I did some home brewing.
Oh yeah.
But now it's a little hectic, and I don't know if the wife would approve with our household setup currently. But down the road, I'll get back into it.
Maybe when they're 9 and 11 instead of
there you go.
3 and 1.
Yeah, right. The 3 and the 1-year-old. Hard to brew.
That's tough.
So Leif, tell our audience where they can find you if they want to look up more about your blog and everything.
All right, well, you can find the blog, Physician on Fire. You can get there a little quicker by typing in POFIRE.com, POFire. And I'm on social media, of course, pretty active on Twitter. That's at Physician on Fire. And I have a Facebook group and a Facebook page. And I'm on Instagram at Physician on Fire, too. So type in those words, you'll find me. Even if you misspell it, it'll get you there. Everybody misspells physician, sometimes me.
Great. Well, keep up the good work. Love your material. So look forward to continue reading and following it.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Rochelle. I appreciate
stay well out there.
Will do. Stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing podcast@thefinitygroup.com or by following Finity Group on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Finity Group LLC.
You can follow me on Twitter at Corey Janoff CFP, Instagram at Corey Janoff, or on LinkedIn under my name, Corey Janoff.
You can follow me on Twitter at Rochelle Finance, or on Instagram, Vanderzanden Rochelle, or on LinkedIn under my name, Rochelle Vanderzanden.
Check out all of the podcast episodes on the finitygroup.com/podcast, on our Finity Group YouTube channel, or your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to check out our financial clarity blog at thefinitygroup.com/blog.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Financial Clarity for Doctors by Finity Group LLC.